Well, welcome everybody. It's really nice to see everybody coming from all the different places of the earth. For some reason today I'm feeling a little jumpy, and I'm really looking forward to Jim's presentation today. I had a meeting yesterday with somebody from Uganda and a potential funder, because I recently found out that the largest refugee population is in Uganda, and there's a lot of unaccompanied children who are suffering. And so we're working on a project to combine the elderly with the youth to, because the elderly are not seen there as well as the youth who are running in the streets. And I just found myself throughout the day yesterday really upset and irritable. And I think it's the enormity of the suffering. So I'm sort of taking that in and recognizing that's why I'm so bitchy. But at the same time, I'm really looking forward to Jim helping me, maybe deepening my presence so that I can cope and thrive, so that I can be of some service to something larger than myself. So I'm deeply grateful for Jim for being with us today. Thank you. Lynn?
Yeah, welcome. I'm deeply grateful for Jim being here today too. And I love, Melinda, how you start with where you are. And that always reminds me of where I am in the moment and what I'm looking forward to in the presentation. Often I am sort of hurriedly getting ready, and then it comes to me, oh, this is for me. This isn't my job. This community is for me. And I'm always so enlivened and centered with our groups. So it's particularly lovely to have you with us, Jim. And I've known you through the years as a longtime beloved focusing teacher and trainer. And you were telling me this morning that a lot of your work is in integrating focusing and spirituality. And I knew that somewhere in my head, but since I've come in contact with you more in the clinical realm, it wasn't in the forefront. And I'm looking forward to getting to know that expertise and that part of you. So welcome, welcome.
Since everybody's talking about where they're at now, I kind of feel like one of those race cars at the starting gate, and yet I don't know which direction I'm going to go. So we'll get started and see where we go. I certainly want to keep the whole presentation very informal, and I work best with questions, so don't hesitate. And sometimes watching a screen, I don't see people that want to talk, or I guess, do you put hands up? How do you do it on your program?
Oh, we just speak.
Oh, good. That's perfect. Just interrupt me.
An invitation, you can put your hand up, but usually we're pretty informal about just speaking when we want to speak.
Good. So I might start with just very few sentences, and then I'm going to do a quick attunement, and then we'll move more deeply into presence. In focusing, as you all know, we're watching or observing our experience. We even use terms like something in you, or you're noticing something in you. So today what I want to do is go deeper into the exploration of this observer or witness, which is what I'm going to be suggesting as we move on, which is who we really are. We're not our thoughts and feelings, but we're the one watching them. I've often heard Jen Lin in therapy sessions say that he would say to someone, are you comfortable with that uncomfortable experience? Or are you comfortable with that discomfort?
Mm.
Well, what we're going to do today is explore this element of being comfortable. Because again, I believe that is the true nature of our being. It's the essence of who we are. And we want to have that more ingrained in our ongoing experience, not just as helpers, but as individuals in our daily life. So that's my brief introduction. What I'll do again is just probably keep it to about 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, of brief attunement, and then we'll talk a little more and do some experiential exercises. So if you'd like, you could close your eyes. It's not necessary, but you might find it more helpful. And drop yourself into the present moment, possibly starting with your body. Noticing what's happening in your body. Becoming more familiar with the subtle sensations that you may not have been aware of. And that can include your breathing. You might want to imagine inhaling relaxation and exhaling tension. With each exhalation, releasing and relaxing, surrendering to the moment, knowing that you're perfectly safe. There's nothing to do, nothing to know, nothing to be. And as we expand our awareness in the moment, we might notice sounds or smells. You might even notice images appearing. And now I'd like you to notice that you're the observer of all of that. You're the one noticing sensations, sounds, smells, images, thoughts. And for a moment, I'd like you to move your attention to that element of your being that's observing and become more familiar with that. In life, we tend to keep our attention lost in our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, and we forget that part of our being that's experiencing it all, noticing it all. You might notice that that element of your being doesn't change, while the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions continually shift and come and go. You might notice the qualities of that observer as somewhat calm and quiet, still, empty. These are words we might use to describe this state of presence. Certainly aware, unchanging, receptive, and accepting of all. And to deepen our state of presence, I'm going to invite you to take one step back and notice that you're also observing the observer. You're aware of an observer and aware of the objects of your world appearing, thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. I'd suggest this is your deepest, truest nature. You might notice it's absolutely contentless in and of itself, and yet content appears in that space of awareness and presence. And we can know that as we practice presence in our lives, this element of our being becomes more accessible on an ongoing basis. It grows and grows and allows us to experience the outside world from and in this place. It excludes nothing and includes everything from within its peace, stillness, calmness, and pristine awareness. So I'll ask you now to gradually prepare to open your eyes slowly whenever you're ready, and simply allow then the visual objects to appear within this same space that you've created. And notice that space doesn't have to leave to accommodate the visual images. So whenever you're ready, you can gradually and slowly open your eyes in your own way and in your own time. So that was my brief attempt to start to guide us into a deeper state of presence. I might even ask now if there's any comments or questions about that before we move on. If anybody wanted to share anything. Okay.
Thank you for that attunement, Jim. I was unaware, now I am, that I am not just the observer of these things. There is that which is observing the observer. That's new to me. So thank you for that.
We'll talk a lot more about that as we move on. We're not going to delve too much deeply into it because it takes us to kind of another realm of presence that we probably won't have time for today, but we'll certainly talk about it and touch on it. And I would suggest whenever we practice presence, or after this session, if you practice presence, that you consider always doing that, because even though that can be difficult early on to do, it does seem to instinctively drop us into a deeper state of presence to watch the observer itself.
Is it, Jim, this is Shashi, is it possible to have what you just said in a written form?
You know what?
In a written form, in a written.
Oh, I actually always do that just spontaneously, organically. I don't think I've ever written it down, but I could find something similar. Or you know what? I do have tapes of me doing it. I could send a tape. I guess I could share that with Melinda and Lynn, and if they can get it out to you, if you're interested.
I would be very interested. I know you have done it a million times, so it comes organically to you, but I would like it to become part of me. It's very good, quick way of touching the self. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And one reason I often start with the body is it's one of the quickest, easiest ways to move into presence, meaning our mind goes into past and future. That's when we suffer and have pain in our world and fear. When we focus on our body, if you focus on anything for that matter, but the body is a great anchor to focus on, to bring our mind to one-pointedness and to get out of the thinking mind, the ego that likes to think in the past and future. And it starts to center us and calm us automatically. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of that too. Any other comments before I want to give just a brief overview of presence to expand on some of the thoughts about it, and then we'll go into all the experiential stuff. Anybody else?
I thought it was interesting, Jim, when it was the observer and the observer of the observer. My first thought was, well, which one controls how I get rid of the tension or whatever? And I thought, when am I ever gonna get it?
Yeah.
Just be with the tension,
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you even mentioned that. Yeah, the observer and the observer, our pure presence does nothing. It's kind of just a ball of love that accepts everything with love. And what we know is if we can experience all the comings and goings of life and the thinking mind that takes us into the past and future, our pain and our anxiety, what happens is that starts to play itself out, finish itself off, and return to its true nature, which is part of that awareness and that balance. So yeah, it's really the main point of working with presence is that we're so used to doing something that to move into a state of being is difficult for people. So oftentimes people work with me for a long time in regular counseling sessions, because I also always move people into presence in my counseling sessions, or if they even just come for presence or spiritual work. It takes a long time to break those habits of doing. They try to do presence and there's no doing, it's a being. So again, I think that'll become more obvious as we move on today. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to just try to give you as much as I can. Let me just make a few statements quickly here. So this would probably be the simplest fundamental description of presence, and that is that it's a state of being fully present with the current moment in an open, receptive, non-judgmental way. So it's being with, it's not doing something. Now, there's a lot of doing happens in presence. Thoughts, feelings, perceptions appear, objects appear, but presence really does nothing. So when we're in presence, we're no longer, as I mentioned a moment ago, we're no longer lost in the mind, in the past and future. And that's where the difficulties in life happen, because the past brings our pain and trauma and the future brings us our anxiety. So when we bring ourselves to the present moment, we start to notice an ongoing sense of peace and balance. And we could say that that's our true nature. That's the background of our experience. That's our deepest, truest nature. And then we could say the ego state's really an altered state. It appears within that and from that. Yeah.
Don't we have to be aware of the trauma in order to let it go, in order to accept it and let it go? Don't we have to be conscious of it?
Well, yes, when we're in presence, that's how the healing takes place. In other words, what I'd say is the reason we're not living in presence is because of our past history, which is all involved in our thinking mind again, the memories, the past, bringing it into the future, into the present, thinking about the future with anxiety. So when we're in presence, again, when I would just kind of rephrase the way you even asked the question and saying, we don't have to anything. What I would suggest, life unfolds naturally. And I trust life and the deepest nature of our being and the source of the universe, for that matter, that what needs to come forth will come forth. So instead of, the old psychoanalysts used to go back and spend years trying to find everything and work on it. And as we know in focusing, I think this philosophy I'm talking about fits perfectly with the entire focusing philosophy. What we're doing is in presence, we're letting arise whatever needs to arise, but we can do it with an openness and a receptivity. And by allowing it, as you're suggesting, allowing it to emerge and basically play itself out, finish its experience, it will eventually move back into wholeness, because the ego is what separates everything. When we're in presence, we're really connecting to the oneness and the wholeness of everything. So yes, that'll come up, and that's what presence helps with, because the deeper we are in presence, the more capable we are of dealing with deeper pains and fears, because we don't get lost in them. And that's why we have to keep developing a deeper state of presence, because if we're in a shallow state of presence, it's not going to take much to pull us out and get lost back in those thoughts and feelings. But as we get used to living from a deeper state of presence, then the deeper traumas can arise and be experienced. And as Jen would say, we can be comfortable with that discomfort and let it resolve itself. So yeah, and again, another response to your question, a lot of people, when I start teaching presence, they'll come in later and they'll say, yeah, I couldn't get in presence because my thoughts kept going or my feelings kept going. And we're not using presence as something dissociated from those experiences. We're experiencing presence and letting those experiences arise, just like mindfulness meditation. You don't do anything, you let it all arise. And what I would suggest is we can trust the organicity of ourselves and the universe, that we don't have to do something. In fact, that's why I think we don't heal. We try to do something with all of these, what we might call traumas that come up, and fears and doubts and on, and they don't get to complete themselves. It's kind of like a child coming on upset and they need to cry. And even if they're being irrational, the ideal way to allow them to heal would be just to put your arms around them, let them know you love them, that they can trust you, they can trust their experience, and let them express themselves and heal, and not try to direct their experience. So that's very much focusing too, obviously. Did that answer your question?
I guess so. But sometimes bringing into consciousness.
Can you speak into your mic a little more? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Sometimes bringing something into consciousness is a way of letting it go and letting it heal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I always like to keep it as an organic process and not say that I'm going to bring it in, because we really don't bring it in anyway. It just happens. We think we're guiding our lives, but that's another issue we could talk about. I don't know if we'll even get to it today. But my point being, if we're in presence and we notice what comes up, if there's healing to be done, our being will bring it up, as you're saying, and then we want to be in presence with it and let it heal. I think it's much more effective, and it creates a faster element of healing if we don't think I need to decide what I need to go get and bring out and work with. I find healing happens much more effectively and quickly if I just allow myself in presence to let what comes up come up, because what I'd suggest is my larger being, you could say the universe, knows a lot more about what's good for me and what's relevant than my little ego that thinks it knows how to control life. So anyway, let's see what our time is here. Okay, yeah, we're still doing pretty good, because I guess around 9 o'clock we're gonna break down. I have a good exercise that can help us deepen our presence that we'll do in triads at around 9 o'clock. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to guide us right now into another awareness exercise, a presence exercise. It'll pretty much build on what I did in the attunement, and then we'll have time to talk about that before we do our triads. Now, this one you can do with your eyes open or closed. It doesn't matter. Some people find it actually is more effective if you do with your eyes open. So once again, I'd like you to notice what you're experiencing, and I'd like you to start with, what are you hearing? What are your bodily sensations? If your eyes are open, what are you seeing? What are your thoughts, emotions that might be coming up? Just be aware of them for the moment. Now, I would suggest that most people are lost in these experiences, meaning they lose themselves. There's not a self in presence with them. They're lost in them. And when we're lost in them, we're managed by them. So there's a favorite spiritual teacher of mine always says, there's nothing wrong with thoughts and feelings as long as we don't believe them and get lost in them and become overly attached to them, because then we become imprisoned by them. So now I'm going to ask you to be aware of the part of you that's, again, observing and witnessing all of that. See if you can move your attention from out there to towards yourself into the part of you that's observing all these sensations, sounds, images. Who's noticing? Where are you looking from? And I'd like you to become as familiar as you can in the moment with that experience of being the one who's noticing it all. What are the qualities you notice associated with that? Again, we might notice it's unchanging. You might use words like still, aware. You might again notice that all the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions change, and this part of your being never changes. It's been with you since as far back as you can remember. It was there when you were 5 years old, and it's always been there. The only thing that's always been there your entire existence here on earth in this life. Everything else changes. So again, we're going to go still deeper and notice there is an awareness, or we could call it a knowing, of the witness and the observer that you were just associating with. So notice what's aware of this observer and reflect on that and become familiar with that. That part of your being that's noticing the observer as well as noticing all the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. But in particular, it's even noticing the observer, the witness itself, themselves, I should say. And I'd like to suggest that you can't be both the one noticing the observer and the observer at the same time. And I'd like you to also notice that if you're lost in the thoughts and feelings, you're not aware of possibly the observer or even the one observing the observer. But as we back into the observer, you're aware, you can be aware of the observer and the experiences appearing in your awareness. And when we back up deeper, observing the observer and all the experiences, it includes everything. It's a broad, open, expansive, boundaryless, limitless awareness. So awareness becomes more limited and constrained as we move out towards the world and getting lost in our thoughts and feelings. As we back up into this deeper place, there's a wholeness, a fullness, a peace, a balance. And it's always there, unchanging, aware. Just being, doesn't do anything. Doing happens in the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions that appear in this space. So the other thing we could say is when we're in the first level of the observer, we're a self in presence. When we move back to be the observer of the self in presence, the observer, and that which is observed, now we're self as presence. We're pure awareness, pure aware creative energy. And again, I'll suggest that this is our deepest, truest nature, where we find the ongoing eternal peace and happiness that is unchanging. And when we can access and embody this, all of life appears within that space, not outside of it. And the more we practice it, the deeper we go into our true nature, into an unlimited, expansive experience of the possibilities of our being and our connection to the universe. So we are that awareness. We're that presence. We could call it our true being, our true self. All right. So you can gradually bring yourself back. You can bring that space with you. And just, if your eyes are closed, when you open them, include the images into that space. So we could say presence is another word for awareness or consciousness at its deeper level. It excludes nothing and it allows everything. So before we do any breakouts, let's talk about that. If you had any comments or questions about any of this or any, its relationship to life or therapy, we have a few minutes, we can do that.
I think I just became aware. Why is it called formless, wordless? No, it's beyond words, because the words, I just became aware of that. Why is it that? Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, and that's why we do use words to describe it. I used a lot of words to say it's peaceful, it's calm, it's empty, but those are pointing towards it. You hit it perfectly. There literally are no words to describe it. It's beyond words. It's the essence, the unformed, the impersonal, from which the personal and the manifestations occur. But in and of itself, it has no content. Yeah, it's beautiful. Oh, I'm glad you shared that. It's great to have that experience.
This is June.
Hi, June.
I think it was hard for me to get where you wanted me to go because there's always a part that's, I realized, watching, supervising, taking care of. So it was a little difficult to leave that behind.
Okay, so what I would say is we don't want to leave it behind. What I'd invite you to do is drop back and notice who's noticing all that. That's that first step of being the observer of it, which is a common step for focusers to be familiar with. Drop back, notice that there's this element of your being that's noticing all these thoughts that are going, or feelings, or memories, and turn your attention for a moment to that part of your being and see if you can become more familiar with that part of your experience. And then from the awareness of that experience, you will automatically allow, it'll just happen. Those thoughts and feelings will still arise, but it'll be within a space that's not lost in them. Because again, once we get lost in our thoughts, then we're trapped by them. And then we typically do give just more energy, or we challenge, or we criticize, or we try to manage, which just adds more energy to the thinking mind. This is dropping out of the thoughts. So we're observing the thoughts, but we're not our thoughts. We're not our feelings. They're thoughts and feelings. Again, nothing wrong with them as long as we don't believe they're true and that they are reality and that they're eternal. They're not. They're simply thoughts and feelings that we'll notice when we watch them from presence shift and change, like clouds in the sky. They'll reform and they'll eventually dissolve. So I don't know if that'll help, but it's the idea of dropping back. And you might even do that third one because it can help you go deeper into the observer. Notice that there's something in you noticing that you're observing. And that, by familiarizing yourself with that space, it doesn't eliminate anything. It just creates a ground of being from which everything can emerge and appear. And it on its own, it will start to shift and change and dissolve.
Thank you.
It's naturally. That was a great question because that's one that comes up for a lot of people. I had mentioned it a little earlier. people think like I should be able to get into this space and instead of thinking, and no, we don't create this space. We recognize it's always there. It's always been there and it always will be there. We familiarize ourselves, remember it, engage in it, fall into it, be it, and then life will still keep appearing. It doesn't eliminate anything. Other thoughts or feelings? Reactions, comments, questions, challenges? Some thought comes up and you have a challenge?
I have a challenge.
Yes, where are you? Where are we?
I see I have a challenge.
Oh, there you are, Robert, yes.
Okay, so my challenge is there's like on some level, I mean, I don't know, there's like the impermanence, everything is always changing.
Mhm.
But then you also talk about as something that has never changed, that's always stayed the same.
Right.
But how do I know that's not just something in my mind, some unchanging state that I supposedly remember?
Because if you
Because I'm actually questioning that if my awareness as a 3 or 8-year-old is really the same as my whatever I call pure awareness right now.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the same. But what do you think?
Well, you can only know it through experience. When we get in touch with that part of us that's always been here, how do I know I'm aware? Ask yourself, all of you, just say, ask yourself, if I ask you, how do you know you're aware? You turn your attention to awareness. I'd suggest that awareness has always been here. So the questions that you mentioned coming up are just thoughts appearing in that awareness. So what happened is if you drop into that awareness, a thought might come up. How do I know this is really awareness, or is this really the truth? Those are thoughts appearing again in that same awareness. Another way to think of it is, this is a simple way. When we work with people, sometimes they'll say, if I say, who are you? Or, you know, well, just that question, they'll say, I'm my body. So the question is then, does your body know you, or do you know the body? And if I took your body away, let's say we cut off a leg, would you still be there? What would be there? Consciousness. Now within consciousness, as you're suggesting, Robert, infinite numbers of thoughts and attitudes, beliefs, emotions, images, memories can come up, but they're all coming up within that awareness, and that awareness never changes. It's always been present, it always will be. That's the thing. That's why, but this is kind of interesting. You know, as many of us, I don't know if any of you are as old as I am, but many of us, as we get older, you feel like on some level, I'm still that youngster. I'm not old. Well, that's because we're actually realizing that who we really are, our true nature, doesn't age. It doesn't change. It's the outside phenomenal world that changes. What we see changes, what we hear and feel. Those change all the time. And everything in the physical world changes over time, but that doesn't. And that's probably why we, in fact, I suggest that is why we say, oh, I don't feel any different than I felt when I was whatever age. So
I just wanted to comment on what you said, Jim, about Jane saying, can you be comfortable with your discomfort? And sort of as we were doing the exercises, I was remembering Jane's voice, and there was a wonderful way that Jane had of speaking to that larger presence in people, and evoking it just in his presence,
right.
and often using the kind of we. Oh yes, we know about that, or yes, of course. You know, that just embracing all of the feelings and the thoughts, and being this larger self, being interested in this larger self that has the thoughts and feelings, and has the sort of bigger, deeper truth. And there's something about us helping each other to see that larger, deeper presence in each other, and that it's kind of contagious, you know.
It's what
when
did you say?
It's contagious.
Oh, yeah, well,
No,
yeah.
when I see that in you, oh yes, of course you feel like that kind of attitude, then that's bringing you into, so we bring each other into that presence too. So thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, you're reminding me about something that's worth talking about briefly here. Talk about when you said it's contagious. They've done research with mind brainwave tests. And what they find is when two people come together and attend to each other, their brain waves start to synchronize. The deeper in presence one person is, the other person tends to move towards more synchronicity and towards a deeper state of presence. And that happens unconsciously without, it's not because of words, it's happening just by being in each other's presence. So it's happening even on a physiological, energetic level that we're actually merging. And again, the idea of helping people is all about being in presence with them, not so much about what we say or do. And if it's coming from presence, what we say and do is typically going to be very helpful, and more helpful than if it's coming from our planned mind. So yes, it is contagious on many levels. And it's the only thing we all have in common. At that level, we're all the same. We're all part of that awareness that I invited you to drop into is the awareness from which everything arises. And that's the core of all of our beings. That is the mutuality of all of our beings. The manifestations of the physical body and the thoughts and feelings, they're different and they change for all of us. And we're all different on that level, but on this deepest level, we're all one and the same. And you know, one other thing, I did bring along something. I'm not going to read many here, but I have some quotes from gentlemen that speak to this. And there's one here in particular that I really liked when he said, it's the me that is not any of the content, yet holds all the content.
Mm.
Remember I said it's contentless, and yet it holds all the content. He also talks about this global sense underneath. The space larger than concepts and beyond concepts, yet includes concepts. So there were just a couple of his statements, there's many more, of course, that where he's speaking to this element of being that I'm referring to today. Okay, this exercise is called noting awareness, and we'll do it in triads. And what we do is, one person at a time, first of all, we'd all start by getting into a state of presence or your deep focusing state, whatever you want to call it, and remain in that throughout the exercise, of course. And then one person at a time, you take your turn, and what you just do is you describe your personal experience of awareness or presence or consciousness, whatever word you want to use. So one person at a time, you might say, for example, awareness is, and again, don't try to memorize anything. Just notice what comes up as you access your presence as best you can. What words come up that describe it? You might say it's quiet, it's expansive, peaceful, whatever comes up for you. Spacious, relaxed, light. I mean, anything's perfect. And what you do is you repeat as you stay in presence all the words that capture that experience for you until you're done. Then when you're done, the next person goes, and each person goes, and then you keep going around the circle. It doesn't matter if you repeat what somebody else said or repeat your own if it feels right, because it's coming from what feels right in the moment as you access awareness. Presence is, or awareness is, and just give your descriptors of what points to that experience for you until you're done, and then go around the room. And again, I remind you, I would invite everybody to stay in a deep state of presence with the person that's talking, with what they're saying, and also with your experience of what they're saying. Because what we find, this exercise is great for deepening. You have to do it to realize how helpful it can be. It's really fun. I think that's all I need to say. Did that was that clear enough for everybody to be able to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Good. And then you just keep doing it till time's up. And I guess we'll have to decide how much time you have, and then you end. But keep going around the circle. Take as much time as you want, each person.
My curiosity is about whether it's another way of talking about the focusing attitude.
Uh-huh.
This way of coming into it is a different, maybe I'll ask him.
Mhm.
It's a different language. And Jean sort of deliberately doesn't use spiritual language, but is pointing in that same place, using other language. Hi, everybody.
Mm.
I just want to make a comment, and then I want to hear everybody's comments. And that is, sometimes when doing this early on, there is a tendency to start to get lost in the thoughts that are coming up versus noticing the awareness that's aware of the thoughts. And we just, when that happens, pull ourselves back to point back to our awareness and do our best to use descriptors of what point to that. I don't know if some of you might have had that happen, but that's not uncommon. So anyway, comments, reactions.
Jim, would you repeat what you just said? That it's not uncommon to get into an emotion. Is that what you just said?
Well, again, in that exercise, it can happen, and it's really an example of what happens in life. We get pulled out of presence and get lost in our thoughts. So for example, in that exercise, one might be sitting there wanting to do the exercise and say, it's calm, quiet. I'm noticing I don't want to do this. That would be a thought appearing. That means you no longer are in presence with presence, but you got lost in the feeling, and then you just notice, in the thought, you just notice that thought arose, and remind yourself to come back to presence again. Because this is what creates the ongoing suffering in our life. We get lost in the thoughts and feelings, and we lose our connection to our deepest state of being. And once we're lost again in those thoughts, then we're trapped, we're imprisoned by them, and then we're off and running. So we want to be able to, when we're noticing that we're getting lost in the thoughts that are arising, just turn our attention back to the awareness of the thoughts and see if we can reconnect there and describe the qualities, which really, again, we said it doesn't have qualities, but what qualities point to it as we reflect on that experience of presence. So not only in this exercise, but this is what we want to be doing in life. This is what I do in counseling sessions with people. When they start to move out of presence, I bring them back into presence because I want them in presence with their experience, not lost in it. So I'm constantly inviting them, and there's a variety of ways to do that with people that we didn't talk about, but to bring people back to connecting to the presence in them in which everything's arising.
Yeah, it's like having the feelings but not identifying with them.
Yeah.
It's the non-identification with whatever is happening. And there's that level of detachment of being able to take a step back from.
Yeah. Now that would be the first level. That's this level. I divide experiencing into 3 levels. And there's more, but those are the 3 I typically talk about. The first one is being lost in the feeling or thought. The second level is on the subject, noticing those objects. Now that, like you said, because people are so lost, we do sometimes conceptualize that almost as detaching from the objects. However, I don't use those words with people because we're not actually detaching from an object. what we're doing is noticing that, and it's already happening.
Jim, I think you froze.
I thought it was me, but I think
He's
I
not
so
on.
wanted to say,
to reconnect.
there you are.
Because the third level is that we aren't separate. If you notice, and I'll invite everybody, this is a good point that I didn't make, and I think this will be helpful to everybody. If you notice that you're the observer of a thought or feeling, or even of an image or a sensation, you'll notice there's no boundary between your awareness and that object, that thought, feeling, or perception. There's no boundaries. So what happens over time? We go from level 1 to be lost in our experience. Level 2 is a dualistic, I'm subject noticing the object. The third level that starts to happen is subject and object merge, because we notice there are everything that's emerging, all the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions are emerging, not just, and this is really important, not just to awareness and in my awareness, they are literally expressions of awareness. It's all awareness. They're manifestation. So the idea literally is to if we have to initially get a person to move out of being lost, so it feels like almost an detachment. I'm observing it. But eventually, we always want to invite people to be as close to those as possible, so that eventually you can move to the place of knowing that there is no separation. It's all the same. It's all different expressions of the same essence of ourselves and of the world. Yeah.
thank you.
Again, I'm trying to, I mean, almost everything we're talking about, I can do like an hour lecture on, so it's quick, but I try to give you a little bit. We don't have much time, but any other questions, comments?
Jim, you froze a little bit there. You said the first is lost in feeling, the second is noticing objects, and the third is noticing they're not separate. Is that it?
Level 1, I could send a handout on this too. Level 1 is I'm lost in, and this is where most people are living their lives. They're lost in their thoughts and feelings. They don't come in your office saying, I'm noticing a depressed feeling inside. They come in saying, I'm depressed. They think they are the depression.
Yeah.
What we want to move them to, and this is a focusing process, obviously, it's just I do it in a more kind of structured way, probably. I want to move them back to noticing, I'm noticing that. Now, what is it? It's either a thought, feeling, or sensation, something like that. It's not I'm depressed. So now that's subject object. I'm the subject noticing that object called depression and a sensation or emotion. That would be level 2. The third level is as you get deepened into presence, presence maintains itself in a way that when you experience the objects, they start to merge. And you realize there's no separation between self and object. I can give you a quick example of how probably everybody has this experience. And again, presence has always been there. It always has. We just forgot about it. But here's an example that I think everybody will relate to. And you can get a sense of what I'm talking about, this merging. And this merging we're talking about here is not lost in emotion. The self is maintained and it includes the experience. All of us have probably done stuff like gardening, sewing, or just simply sitting reading a book, watching television. And you get so absorbed in it, you forget you're there. Right? We say we get lost in the activity. The difference is you're not trapped in that. When you're gardening, you're not managed by the experience of gardening, like on level 1, where you're lost in the thoughts or feelings, but you're not experiencing a direct experience of Jim as self as a personalized separate being in relation to this object, they merge, and gardening just becomes what it is, and it is who you are in the moment, or sewing or reading. And then somebody calls your name, you go, oh yeah. Then you're back to, oh, I'm Jim, I was gardening, or I was reading. We all know that experience, right? That's the merging. That's the place that starts to become more of your natural way of living life in the present moment, totally engaged and one with what you're experiencing. That is a deeper, what some people would call spiritual level of this depths of our true nature called presence. Did that help? Did that make some sense?
Thank you.
Again, I'm doing this in such a quick way. It's a little difficult, but hopefully it's registering in some way. Maybe one day we can do an all-day workshop on presence.
Oh, I love it.
Great. That would be a lovely.
I'd love it.
Yeah. Why don't you
I
why
would
don't
love
you set it up, and we'll notify people about it. I was just
Please do.
yeah, there's a lot of enthusiasm about that. I was just thinking that in any focusing moment, there's that sense of the thought and the feeling and the presence being that one is fully in the experience of something arising, of the shift, of the being. And so we those of us who know focusing really know that micro moment where that is happening. I wanted to ask you, Jim, it seems to me that that there becomes a choice point in awareness of something, of letting it go, like the thought about the exercise that you're doing, and just coming back to the presence, or following it in a deeper way, which is often what we do in focusing. And it seems like both of those movements lead us to being to more awareness, but they seem like there's a divergence there, and maybe the letting it go and just coming back to this moment is wonderful for me. And sometimes I do that in the mornings, but then there are other times when something arises, oh, what is that? And how does that work? And what's the feeling of that? And that's the more traditional focusing moves.
Yeah, I would say they're the same thing. What arose in you was the thought, oh, I want to experience more of that. That's just another arising in your awareness. So awareness doesn't exclude anything, and actual choice will come up and it will happen. Now, we could talk about choice in a variety of ways. It gets very complicated.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
the bottom line is that if you're in presence, whatever life has to offer will happen, including, oh, what might arise organically is I want to sit in presence and go so deep that I'll detach from the world. That could happen where you're in total pure awareness being aware of awareness. You're not even there. And what's going to happen unless you pass over at that moment, you're going to come back. So organically you're conscious, and it might come back and go, oh, I want to get out of this chair now and go mow the lawn, or I want to think about that thought. But these are all arising happening into and as awareness. It would probably be fun to talk more about this.
Yeah,
time. So, because I'd love to hear your
Right.
response and play with it a little bit. But,
So much more about each of these things.
But I notice our time's up.
Yes, it is. That
Quickly.
There's so
was
much.
so in
thank you so
awareness.
much. I just
Right.
want to thank everybody for attending and participating. I enjoyed it. I hope you did, and I hope somehow it might have been helpful. And don't hesitate to connect. And Melinda, if you didn't already do it, I didn't notice, you could send my email.
I did. This was very, Jim, this was very rich, and I would love to talk to you offline about supporting us, collaborating on creating a program, a day program on presence.
Good.
Great. Thank you very,
Very
very
good. Thank you very much.
I'm aware of awareness.
aware of
Yeah.
aware.
What's arising in our awareness is it seems like it's time to leave, right?
Thank you so much, Jim.
Sure,
And
thank you.
see you all.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Jim.
See you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Be aware.
you.
Thank you once again, Lynn.
Bye.
Bye.
Pleasant, just fine.
Thank you, Melinda.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Christine.
Count me into your workshop. Yeah.
I'll call you when I get home. Thank you, Jim.
So long, Lenore.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.